Hello my creative friends, it's time to take another art break and I have the cutest little character that I developed this week. He's the sweetest little hedgehog. He has oversized glasses and a cute little fun top hat on the top. Sometimes these characters steal my heart and this little guy has done just that. I'm going to walk you through the steps at the beginning of how you could possibly draw a little cute hedgehog. Just break it down to some simple steps to give you some ideas of if you'd like to try, you can try doing it yourself. But if you would rather just go ahead and trace and paint right along with me, I do have a sketchbook membership. Go ahead and scan this QR code right here. It'll lead you right over to my sketchbook membership. That's where I have all of the line tracers for any of the drawings I do on my channel. It's very reasonably priced. I so appreciate all those who support my channel that way. Thank you so much for doing so. Well, let's start right with the drawing part, and then I'll lead you into the watercolor part and show you how you can create these beautiful little watercolor blends. And I do put a little bit of gouache at the end just to add a few more details, and of course some scribbly bits using some color pencils as always, and some pens. Well, let's get started and grab your coffee, grab your favorite art material, and let's take an art break. For this hedgehog, I wanted it to be looking right straight forward and the body turned sideways. So I'm going to be starting with the head drawn at an angle. I kind of start with an angle line first so I can build that tilt of my head first, and then I just build that round body off the back. I'm going to come up to the cheek line and I'm going to draw an additional line there. That way that will be the side of his where his little spikes are, and you're going to see a little underbelly. For hedgehogs have just tiny little ears, so I'm going to do those tiny little ears off to the side. And for his eyes, I'm giving him smaller eyes too, but I'm putting him a little bit farther away. That gives it kind of that cute baby animal look almost. They're just going to be simple rainbow eye shapes with a little line underneath. And for his nose, it's a kidney bean shape with a little smile off the bottom. To do the top hat on the very top, it's just a simple smile face, then come back around and copy that shape and put a rectangle on the top. For the spikes on the top, I'm going to be starting with the spikes going towards the right. And when I get around or towards the top of his back, I'm going to switch them and switch the spikes and have them go the opposite direction. I'm not going to go all the way down. I'm going to start back where his chin is, and then I'm going to make little soft jig jags that will come all the way underneath because that's the underneath of his body. Now to do the legs, they're basically boot shapes. You can get as detailed as you want, but I'm just doing simple little boot shapes to show you here. The front ones that you would see that would be facing you, those are a full boot shape. You'll see the whole shape of the leg and the foot. The ones that are tucked behind, you're only going to just see the bottom of that boot shape. And that's how simple it is to put the little legs on. And then you can add all the little fuzzy cute bits that you want to add to give your little hedgehog as much whimsical character as you would like. Now let's move into the watercolor steps. I'm using the watercolor paper I normally use, the Canson XL watercolor paper, 140-pound watercolor paper. And then I'm just using two different sets of watercolor. This happens to be the Paul Rubens set. And then I have another one that's called Art Philosophy. I'll be using a few colors out of there too. Basically, I always say spend a little bit more money on your watercolor paper and just use whatever paints you might have. Now this one, I'm going to be starting with the strawberries. I had already done some testing of color off to the side. When you're doing watercolor, it's a great idea to try to select a color palette that you would like to work with first before you begin your painting, because a lot of times there's not a lot of leeway into changing what you want to change as after you put your colors down, because those colors are translucent, watercolor is translucent, and the pigments stain your paper. So it's hard to change colors once you have them down. So it's always a great idea to start out with a color palette on a separate sheet, figure out what you want to use, and then start your painting. At this stage, I'm basically doing my paint on a dry paper and then blending my colors wet into wet. So those strawberries, when I first painted that area, the paper was dry and I layered in my red, and then I went in and I picked up a darker shade of red and tapped one area, and it just allowed my paints to mix together and create that really pretty kind of watercolor blend. These first layers are always mixed to either a tea consistency, no darker than a coffee. You always want to gradually build your colors when you're doing watercolor. If you go too quick, too fast, your colors end up looking really chalky and you lose that really fun part of watercolor of seeing those translucent layers shining through each other. I'm going to be doing the same steps for pretty much everywhere. I build my colors slowly, add the colors on, let them dry. They're going to dry lighter, so what they look like when they're wet won't be that way when they're dry. Now, when you're doing watercolor, you're always painting the shadows. So you start with your light colors and then you layer on your dark colors. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing watercolor is that whatever areas touch each other and they're wet, those colors will run right into each other. So if I do not want any of that red to go into my greens or my green from my background to go into that red, I don't want to work on those areas when they're touching each other when they're wet. Watercolor always wants to flow wherever the paper is wet, so you need to keep that in mind when you're kind of deciding which areas you want to paint. I'm kind of working more on the background, and then I'll be starting to work on my hedgehog in the middle. I'm going to skip over some of these steps. It's basically the same way though. Everything that I'm painting on this layer is I'm basically just layering on those first layers and the lightest shade, and then perhaps picking up just a darker shade and then tapping it off to the side, one side normally, and that's going to help create more of a contour or that shading that I'm looking for. The light side will be the highlights, the darker side will be the shadows. But then again, these are only the beginning stages. I usually at least put 2 to 3 to possibly 4 layers of watercolor, so I'm just building my layers slowly. When developing these paintings that have a lot of different types of foliage in the background, it's a great idea to just switch up the colors of your greens. Make some a little bit more blue, make some a little bit more yellow, just change it up a little bit. Then everything won't have the same feel. It's going to look like there's more depth into your painting if you change the colors up just ever so slightly. One way I do like to do this is I will have the colors just sitting there, my different pools of green, and I'll pick up a little bit of one color, mix it in, and then I'll do the same thing, add a little bit more, or just start up. But I usually have about 3 to 4 different colors of green and blue, and I'm just mixing them together. And by doing it that way, it's going to harmonize your painting. Now this is where I'm going to start on the hedgehog. At first I mixed up a color that was super light, even a little less than tea, just a little bit of color. And I'm putting that little bit of color towards the outside of the spikes and then adding more water to the middle. I definitely want to take my time when I'm building this little area because it is such a larger area than, say, some of the leaves. They're smaller little individual pieces, but this area here is kind of this big block of color, and I want to make sure I have enough interest in that big block of color, and the way I'm going to get that is to basically build my colors a little slower. I'm going to want a difference between his face and his body and the underneath of his chest areas. So I'm going to be mixing these neutral colors in my palette by adding a little bit of black, a little bit of burnt umber, raw umber, whatever I might have, and slowly building my colors. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing watercolor is it is best if you can allow your watercolor to naturally dry. That way your paint and your pigments will soak down into your paper instead of just sitting right on the top. It's great if you can allow time for that. Sometimes you do have to speed dry things because, well, you got to get the painting done and you just need to use a dryer. But if you can allow that extra time to allow it to dry and then fully go down into your paper, you're just going to get more of a rich quality of paint at the end. At this stage, it is a little hard to see the differences in the color on the hedgehog, but I keep on adding as I go. This is a student grade watercolor paper, so it does dry a lot faster than if I was using 100% cotton. 100% cotton watercolors are great to paint, or watercolor paper is great to paint on. I just do a lot of painting, and so I often tend to use the Canson XL. It's a lot more reasonably priced. I paint a lot, so I just use that a lot, but use whatever you would like to paint on. There's lots of different benefits when using the 100% cotton paper. Your colors are just going to flow and blend so much differently than they are on a student grade paper. This is where you're going to see me add a little bit more darker shadow around the one side of his head. I want that head to feel like it's forward and it's more prominent or poking out farther than his body. So the head is going to be slightly lighter than what the body is. So I'm going to be building more of a stronger shadow on the right side of his little face. You might want to consider making one of your legs darker, one of them lighter. Usually the back leg would be darker and that front leg would be lighter. So it's just some of those subtle areas. And around the ears, I usually have a little bit of a shadow area up there as well, but I'm going to be layering in just a little bit of pink in the inside of his ears. He's going to get some little sweet pink cheeks as well as a little pink mouth in the end. For this illustration, I decided I would use more of a Payne's gray with maybe just a tish bit of black mixed into it. Instead of using a harsher color black for his hat, and some of the flowers in the background are also, or the leaves are more of a Payne's gray, I wanted to just play a little bit with not necessarily having such a strong shade of black for the hat, but still have a dark color. And I like the way it turned out, and I really did like the idea of using the Payne's gray for some of the leaves in the background. It added a very interesting contrast to that area. I also watered down that Payne's gray and mixed a little bit of blue in it too to create more of a foliage background, but I kept the colors really light for the background. I still wanted some of that blue and that green in the background, but not so strongly. I wanted the attention to be kept on the actual shapes and the background to just be more of a slight little color. When creating this illustrative type of painting, what I like to do is make sure my colors are flowing all the way around my painting. That way your eye travels the complete way around, and it really does harmonize it very well too, is if you can use some of the same colors everywhere. If it's up high, maybe it needs to be in the middle, and maybe it needs to be down at the bottom as well, and then that way your eye will travel around your painting. I'm using the same colors that I used for the strawberries for the band of his hat. So I have some of that red color at the top, in the medium, and at the medium area of my painting, and then at the very bottom. At this stage, I'm going to be building the body of the hedgehog. I'm using the same colors that I had used before, but because they're translucent, just by adding another layer of the same color, pretty much mixed to tea consistency or coffee, it's going to change it a lot because you layer on the colors, and even though they're the same, you're still going to see what's underneath. So I'm slowly building this up, and I'm keeping my stroke work. You're going to see my strokes that I'm putting on, and I want that look because hedgehogs have got those little prickles, so I want that to be kind of a detail element in this little animal. Every once in a while you can see me dipping out of that other pan of color. In that pan of color I do have kind of it's called an apple color, and then real russety color of a tone of red, and I really like the way that looked on top of the mushrooms, and I even added a little bit of that russety tone onto my strawberries as well. I'm still letting my paint dry, and as it's drying, it's getting a little lighter, so I'm adding another layer on, especially those darker areas, but I'm still trying to leave a little bit of that poking through. So often when I'm doing this painting, I'm doing a darker hat, but I still want to see just a little bit of the light, so I'm not going to be painting it all the way in. I'm going to be leaving little highlights of those original colors that are on there, or just a few little layers that you might see through. So that's why it's a great idea to work your way darker, start light, so you don't lose all your highlights when you're painting, because you really can't bring those lighter colors back in. You can always add some white, that you can always do that, but it's really hard to lose the highlights of that color back in. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes it's a little hard to explain. I'm hoping that I make sense. You'll have to let me know in the comments, did it make sense? Was it understandable? Sometimes I feel like I'm just rambling, and if it makes sense, and if you're really learning anything about how to put watercolor on, and that I want you to have success on doing your watercolor too. So those are some of the beginning steps that I do. Now I am just about finished with my painting. I'm going to take the tape off from it, and I'm going to be doing some color pencils. I love doing color pencil with watercolor. I just love the little subtle bit of texture you can get with it. I often like to add a few colors that I didn't use in my watercolor. I like to use those in the color pencil. So I'm going to start with adding a little bit of scribble bits here and there, some line work into my greenery. I don't follow lines exact. I'm just really kind of twisting and turning my pencils, creating loose line work. Before I forget, I did go back in and add just a darker quality around the eyes. I wet that area ever so little bit with water. It had plenty of time to dry. It actually had dried overnight when I came back to do my second round of painting. That area was nice and dry. I went in with just a tiny bit of water around the rainbow shape of my eye, and then I tapped in a darker shade of color. And that just brings those eyes another layer of that they're going back into the head, is by adding that really pretty shadow around it. The eyes are going to get really dark when I add the Micron pen to them, but I wanted to add just that little bit of darkness all the way around to make it look like those eyes are a little bit more sunk back into the head. And here I'm putting on the Micron pen for the eyes. I like doing the little scribbles inside of the eyes, and I try to leave a little catch light of light in each little eye. Every living thing has a catch light. That's that bright light in our eyes. So it's really, I like, if I can get it by just scribbling, I like to add it in. But if I lose it, I can always add it in with either like a Uniball pen or a little bit of gouache, something like that, to bring that little bright light back in. I continue on doing my ink work using my Micron pen, and I always like to do more loose line work, so I'm stopping and starting, and not everything is outlined exact. I even go beyond my painting, so it'll go past what I've already painted, and that just gives me that very much that loose quality that I like to have. By doing the ink work this way too, it also adds to the fuzzy quality of this character. I'm going to be going into the middle of him and adding in some like free form little spikes in the middle and adding little bits of little circles as well. I need to add some more detail inside of that body, and I'm going to be doing that with my pens. This little character is wearing glasses, and the gouache product works really great for this, to add the glasses because it's very opaque and I want them to stand out, so I'm using a little bit of red gouache in my mini brush. I can add a little bit of water to this, thin it out, twist my brush to make a nice point, and then go ahead and paint the glasses. The gouache is going to work great for this. I can go over the colors. You won't see whatever's underneath it, so it's going to look like they're sitting away from his face. It's a great way to add these more solid elements to your painting, is to use a little bit of gouache. Another area I used the gouache is I mixed up a little bit of light green, and I was going to be using that for the seeds of my strawberry. At this stage, there really isn't a way that I could have added a light green shade of paint to those strawberries because they're already painted that red color, but I can come back in with gouache and add it on easily. So I mixed up a little bit of green and some white and then just tapped on my little strawberry seeds. I'm also going to be using the gouache in a slightly different way. I'm going to be mixing a very thin layer of gray and adding it to the body of my hedgehog as well. The next step I'm going to work on is adding a little bit more contrast in that big body of that hedgehog. And I'm going to do that by adding some watered down gouache. I've mixed up a gray, added some water to it, and then now I'm going to be stroking it here and there. Gouache has more pigment or solids inside of it, so it's going to be slightly more opaque in this way, but because I have more water in it, I still have more of a translucent quality, so I'm going to build my layer up that way. Now I could have added more watercolor to it, but I decided I would try the gouache look, and I kind of liked it. I'll be adding a little bit more details inside of that body too by adding some more colored pencils, by adding a little bit more spiking to that area. I also brushed on some just plain white gouache in those areas just to bring a little bit of sparkle or some white highlights and a little bit more like a white spine. I guess I don't even know what those things are called on the hedgehogs. Spine. Maybe they're a spine. Anyway, I put a little bit of white on that too to add just a little bit more interest. This was a super fun painting to build and to create, and adding all those little layers. The more I'm using gouache, the more I like it, and it does have its use. I'm just practicing and using it and seeing what I can do with this product. We're almost finished with this cutie. We're going to take the tape off soon. I also wanted to let you know that inside of my Ko-fi shop, I do have digital reprints of this particular painting I did. You can use it in your handmade items if you're a crafter or a handmade artist yourself and you enjoy using watercolor images. You'll definitely want to check out my Ko-fi shop to see what I have available for this super cute little painting. Well, let's see what it looks like sitting in my studio among some of the other paintings we've created so far on my YouTube channel. These little storybook style paintings I love to create. I love the whimsical nature of them, and the characters come to life and kind of tell their own story. I do have some of these as well as digital items on my Ko-fi shop. And here's our little hedgehog. I still have to name him. I'll have to figure out what to name him. He does look kind of like a regular curious fellow that's on his way to someplace fun. Well, if you enjoy doing art and crafts in a whimsical style, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. Well, thanks for joining me, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.